Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Surf People in Place session of 2025. For those of you who regularly attend, you will notice that I am not Ewan Leach. I'm Emma Scott, Surf's Events Information and Communication Manager. Ewan has flu, so unfortunately won't be with us today. So myself and our Policy Manager, Derek Rankin, will be navigating you through this morning's session. Unfortunately, Irene Beautyman is unexpectedly not able to join us for today's session, which means that it will be a shorter session with just one speaker, and we're hoping to have Irene present at a future event. So the format for today will include a presentation from Leah Black of Foundation Scotland, who will be discussing the development of her Regenerative Futures Fund. Leah comes from both a funding and grassroots third sector background and brought knowledge from both roles when creating this place-based fund. Derek will then chair a question and discussion session where you will have the opportunity to ask Leah any questions arising from her presentation, but also have the opportunity to bring any information to an open, interactive discussion. Leah's keen to hear from people who are doing something similar or are interested in doing something similar in their area. Then before the closing remarks from me, Heriot Watt student Lauren McNiven will give some information on some research that she's carrying out into living well locally in later life. And then she'll be giving some information on how you can get involved with that work, and she's keen to hear from people within the network. So I would now like to hand over to Leah Black.
Thank you, Emma. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, great. Well, it's fantastic to be here, and thank you to Emma and Ewan and Derek for having me along. And thank you for the introduction as well, Emma. I'm just looking around the room and seeing a couple of names and faces that I recognise, so great to see you. So as Emma said, I have been working on a new initiative in Edinburgh called the Regenerative Futures Fund. For this session, what I'm going to do, I was kind of thinking about if I was you, what would I want to know? So I'm going to sort of paint the picture around kind of the vision for the Regenerative Futures Fund. And then I'm going to focus quite a bit on the how, because what I'm guessing is that you might be thinking about, how could you do something similar in your place, because this is a place-based fund. And you're obviously all people who are working in places across Scotland. And working in the open has been a really key feature of the whole of what we've done with Regenerative Futures Fund, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And I'm always really up for sharing learning, but also learning from others, getting feedback, being challenged, and all those kind of things. I'm not going to use slides. I'm just going to talk. Because I think slides can sometimes be a bit weird when you're online, because you just see the big slides and not much kind of person interaction. I have got one image that I'm going to show later on. Okay, so I'm going to tell you first of all a little bit about Regenerative Futures Fund. So it is a new 10-year community fund for Edinburgh that puts decision-making power into the hands of people who are most often excluded. And it supports approaches to improve the lives of people living in poverty and experiencing racism, and to contribute towards a just green transition by enabling equity, power sharing, and long-term change. So this was created by and for people in communities in Edinburgh, and I'll talk a little bit more about how it came about. It's going to give funding to grassroots organisations and movements, giving them the opportunity to think and plan for the long term, tackling the root causes of poverty, racism, and the environmental crisis. The fund is going to launch in 2025 with the first phase that we're calling capacity building, that's going to be launching in the next few weeks. No, probably the next few months. And it's going to provide funding and support for a group of between 10 and 15 community organisations in Edinburgh for 10 years. The funding for each organisation will be up to £100,000 a year, and it's going to be unrestricted, funding in unrestricted in terms of the kind of focus of the fund. Which again we can talk a bit more about as well, because obviously long-term unrestricted funding is the holy grail in the funding world, in the community world. This will be funded from a mix of philanthropic foundations, local authority, individual philanthropists, and through building partnerships with the private sector. A really key part of Regenerative Futures Fund is that we are completely shifting decision-making power to local people. So there's decisions on what's going to be funded will be made entirely by a group of people who are recruited, who have experienced poverty and inequity in Edinburgh. So we're actually really close to putting a call out to recruit that decision-making group. They'll make decisions on both phases, so the capacity building phase, and then going through to the second phase, which is the 10-year programme, 10-year grants. And I can talk a little bit more about the decision-making panel and how that's all going to work as well. Yeah, so how will we know this work is making a difference is a question that I'm asked a lot. So we've done a lot of work, which I'll talk a little bit more about and tease out as well, around monitoring, evaluation and learning. We've developed a theory of change, we've done outcome mapping, but one of the key features of this is that we have designed this with community organisations, with individual people in Edinburgh and with funders, but we will refine it with the organisations that are going to be funded and with the decision-making panel, this group of local people with lived experience. So I'm just going to focus a little bit now on some of the how we have done this. So I started working on this in 2021, and it was just an idea. And I think, like often some of the best ideas, this grew out of complete frustration. So I was for 6 years the chief executive of a community organisation in Edinburgh called Whale Arts, which has been around for a long time, for over 30 years. And I was there during lockdown, and I experienced something that I'm sure lots of you experienced as well during that period, where you probably felt for a moment extremely trusted by funders who were possibly throwing money at you, telling you that you're closest to the community, that you know what's best for the communities that you're serving. And they might have also said, don't worry about reporting too much, it's okay, we trust you. And this kind of moment of feeling totally trusted by funders was amazing. And I was having conversations with kind of fellow peers and colleagues, and my colleagues at Whale Arts saying, goodness, wouldn't it be amazing if this is how it always was. And then the other thing that was going on at the moment in Edinburgh back in 2021 was the Poverty Commission. So we had a big piece of work around poverty in Edinburgh, which said, we intend to end relative poverty by 2030. So big, bold aim. And then we had another piece of work around climate, which said reach net zero by 2030, working with communities. And obviously that's a bigger piece of work as well. And I just thought, God, I live and work in Edinburgh, where there's so much wealth, so much resource. There must be a way of pulling that together in such a way that we could create something that wouldn't just be short-term project funding, restricted to a theme, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years maximum, that would be bold and ambitious and aligned with these long-term strategies to say, if we are serious about ending poverty in Edinburgh, if we're serious about reaching net zero, our communities are so well placed to lead that change or to co-lead that change. And a lot of people talk about system change and transformational change and root causes and prevention and all these things. But we're not going to get there if we are only ever able to think and act short term, because our funding is only ever short term. So I sort of started writing. I wrote a blog back when Twitter wasn't the horrible place it is now, and sent that out on Twitter, and realized there was a lot of other people that were like, oh yeah, like this would be amazing, a 5-year fund, a 10-year fund that shifts power to communities, that pulls resources from different places, that gets people to collaborate in different ways that we don't really see at the moment. So I got a group of funders to agree to fund a development phase. So I was then seconded I agreed to secondment between my employer, so that was Whale Arts and EVOC, and I moved to EVOC. So we had a group of funders who wanted to fund this, so small amounts of money to run a development project. But what was interesting was from the very beginning, the funders, and it's funders that you'll all recognise in Scotland, like Robertson Trust, Cora Foundation, National Lottery, a little bit from the local authority. Can't remember who else was in the development phase off the top of my head, but and they all wanted to come together and learn from this. And what they said was, we want to do more work like this in Scotland, but we don't really know exactly how to do it. So from the very beginning, those funders weren't just putting money in; they were getting involved in terms of learning and their own learning and development, to take that back into their own organisations as well. So when we started working on the development phase, which started in 2022 and ran kind of for about a year and a half, 2022 to summer 2024, we split this up into different sections. So we worked on, I'll just tell you the different areas, and I'll give a quick run through each of them, trying to be kind of as practical as possible. So we worked on fund design, we worked on hosting and legal structure, we worked on fundraising and money moving. And then we had another section that we called field building. So that was doing, trying to practice open working as much as possible, a strand of work around collective imagination, and then a strand of work around mapping and understanding systems in the city, and systems that we think are not serving this type of work well at the moment. So one of those would be the way that funding works and the funding system. We set up the fund design strand, initially thinking about how do we want to design this, and who needs to be involved in designing this programme. So we initially had the funders. So we had 3 groups. We had the funders community of practice. They're the funders who were funding the development phase. There was a few other people in there who weren't putting money in. Like we had David Cowan from Scottish Government, who's head of Regeneration, who I think lots of you will know. He got involved with people from the local authority. Then we had representatives from each of these funders. So it was quite a big group of people all bringing different perspectives. We recruited a group of community organisations. So we did a call in Edinburgh, and we just, put a call out and said, look, we're working on this new thing. It might sound a bit mad. It might sound like it's never going to work, but does anyone want to come and get involved? So we pulled together a group of community organisations. We tried to keep it as representative as possible of different types. So some like very sort of hyper-local place-based organisations that just work in one place, organisations representing different marginalised groups, some of whom were citywide, some of whom were kind of working in one part of Edinburgh. And then the third group was working with people who have experienced poverty. So we're really lucky in Edinburgh because we had, through the Poverty Commission work, had an existing group called End Poverty Edinburgh, who are absolutely amazing, and they're supported by Poverty Alliance, and they were kind of initially gathered together during the Poverty Commission, but they're absolutely amazing, brilliant colleagues who I feel really lucky to have spent quite a lot of time with over the last couple of years. And they do a lot of work advocating for people who've experienced poverty. They do presentations and talks, and they're brilliant. So we worked with them. So those were the 3 co-design groups. And that's basically how we designed the fund over the course of a year, was working with these 3 groups. Another key part of work of the fund design, which I wanted to mention, was working with facilitators, which I sort of did, I suppose, out of necessity when I started, because I didn't have a team. I was seconded to EVOC, so I was working with the brilliant colleagues at EVOC, but I was slightly in the periphery in a way, being seconded in and working on something that was not an integral part of EVOC. So I recruited a team of facilitators, and it's one of the best things that I did, actually, which was slightly intuitive. It was like, I need people to come and help me, but actually that group of facilitators ended up being a really brilliant sounding board, support network, almost kind of peer mentoring type model. And they had responsibility for, one of them had responsibility for End Poverty Edinburgh facilitation, one for the funders, one for the community organisations. But we ended up coming together, and they all ended up working on different things as the project kind of grew and evolved. With the fund design, we did loads of work. I can share reports and things. We did a lot of work on outcome mapping. We did theory of change work. We did a lot of learning sessions. Yeah, there's a learning report I can share on that. Another thing that we explored during the development phase was around hosting and legal structure. So EVOC was the development phase host. Brilliant, really important in terms of local trust and access to local networks. And then over the course of the development phase, we were looking at, do we create a separate organisation for this? What are the pros and cons of that? And we ended up through a sort of another strand of work, landing on Foundation Scotland being the best host for this work long term. So that's why I'm now employed by Foundation Scotland. I moved to Foundation Scotland halfway through 2024. The money side of things, which I'm now calling money moving instead of fundraising. This is just a very new thing. I'm just testing this out, so you can tell me what you think. So we have got £5.75 million committed to this programme to date. The overall target is £15 million, which allows us to do that, run that 10-year programme and support that group of organisations over 10 years. This has not been very straightforward, as you would imagine. This is a pooled fund, so it means that money comes from lots of different places and ideally cross-sectoral. So at the moment, we've got that 5.75 is made up of National Lottery Community Fund, Robertson Trust, Esme Fairbairn, Turn to Us, some from Foundation Scotland, and then the local authority. And I'm happy to talk more about that in this session or out with. I suppose kind of key points to make are that there's real appetite for this with funders and with the local authority. There's a lot of excitement around how can we do things differently? How do we really get into changing systems and making things work, making our systems work better for people who are most marginalised? How do we bring lived experience voices into everything that we're designing and that is designed for those people? So just doing this with people rather than for them. But I suppose a kind of key reflection is that although, you know, a lot of the themes of what we're trying to do with Regenerative Futures Fund are embedded in funders' strategies, it's quite difficult to sometimes get funders to move that big decision forward, to actually make the decision to put £2 million or £1 million into a programme like this. I think the hopeful view is that it's happened, it's happened, and it's happening. And I think there is real appetite from funders to do things differently and to work more in this way. So I think the more of us that are doing things like this, we're paving the way for other people to try and push funders to work in different ways. And obviously this isn't the be all and end all, this isn't the only way of working. But it's just that shift from, you know, short term dealing with the symptoms, dealing with the things that are happening now, decisions being made like within organisations, to decisions being made locally, and pooling our resources together and collaborating at all different levels in a programme. we've done quite a lot of work on what we call field building, and something that I would urge you to have a look at if you're interested is the principles of open working. I had read a bit about this before I started working on Regenerative Futures Fund, but it's really amazing. So it's essentially sharing what you're working on as you're working on it, on the assumption that if you're frustrated about something, or you're working on something, or you're thinking about something, there's going to be loads of other people who are thinking about that and working on that. So you're kind of building networks, you're meeting people who are like-minded, who share similar kind of challenges or frustrations. But the other part of it that I think is really interesting is there's a phrase that I quite often think of. There's a brilliant book on open working which I can share with Emma. I can share the link with Emma, and you can all have a look at it. And this guy, he talks about sharing your bad first drafts. There's quite often our bad first drafts, we keep them in a folder. We don't share them with one person. We don't tend to share our bad first drafts with the world. But it's a really, really good thing to do, because sometimes I think if you keep things to yourself, you probably get more and more scared of sharing them. But it's amazing how when you do share something that is like a bit half-baked or a bit of a brain splurge or something, actually there's loads of other people out there that are thinking the same, and the more we can kind of join together around some of these ideas. For me anyway, the ideas that I sort of started off with, and how that's turned into this a brilliant program with loads of people contributing, and then it becomes not your weird little idea anymore. It becomes like a real thing that lots of people are passionate about and working on and putting their own spin on. We've also done some work on collective imagination, which again I can share some links on. Essentially, like using kind of like thinking about long-term visioning, using creativity. So we ran a program called Future Fridays, which was run by two poets, Shasta Ali and Jennifer Williams, and we got a little bit of money from the University of Edinburgh to run this program, and it's been absolutely amazing. I'll send a link to Emma. We have created a poetry anthology, which I normally have a copy of, but I don't have it with me right now. It's at my desk. And the poetry anthology, the poems were written by people from Edinburgh who were part of our co-design group, people who'd never written poems before. And it's just a really a beautiful way of bringing people together around like collective long-term visions, and getting them to have fun and be joyful and be hopeful, because there's obviously a lot of awful stuff going on in the world right now. So creating these little pockets of creativity and hope is something that we've done during the development phase, and that we'll keep doing as we go. So I've got about 5 minutes left. I thought in the last 5 minutes, what I would quite like to do is just talk about what happens next, before we move into conversation. So I'm really almost just unbelievably excited, cock a hoop, that I've got two colleagues now, which is so exciting. So because of the collaborative nature of Regenerative Futures Fund, which hopefully I've conveyed, one of the things we designed in was a co-leadership model. So when I moved to Foundation Scotland last year in July, one of the first things we did was start thinking about recruiting the team. So we have three salaried members of staff working on this now, and one is a co-head. So Ala Ross, who is my co-head, started in December. So she has completely hit the ground running, and hopefully you all get to meet her at some point soon. She's amazing. And it's a completely even co-leadership model. So we're both in the same salary at the same level, and both full-time. And then our other colleague Andy started yesterday. So yeah, it was like the first time that we spent time together yesterday. So he's our participation lead, and his focus is going to be on recruiting the decision-making panels, lived experience panel. He's going to be supporting them in terms of making decisions over the next few months for the capacity building phase, and then moving into the 10-year phase as well. So that's big news in terms of the the team. We're about to put some comms out around the launch of the fund. We are going to be recruiting the local decision-making panel, and then we'll be launching the capacity building phase. Capacity building phase will fund about 25 organisations to develop their applications and their capacity, so that we're not, one of the big things that we've designed into this is that most funding programmes are more geared towards organisations that are, we call them big and shiny. So organisations that have maybe got, you know, fundraising capacity, they've got big teams, and really kind of leave behind small grassroots organisations that can't meet like really quick deadlines, that are don't have fundraisers, that maybe have language barriers. So we've designed this capacity building phase so that more organisations can work through this phase, work up their applications, work with each other, work out what it is they need to put in place in order to hold this over 10 years. So we're developing a governance ecosystem, which I was going to share the visual of, but I don't think I will actually. I think we can just go into conversation after this. I can pop it up on the screen if anyone's interested. But we've essentially created an ecosystem for the governance, because what we're trying to get away from is that funders fund this and they're top of the tree, and they have oversight and control of everything. And what we don't want to happen is that the decision-making panel become this sort of tick box secondary thing that we did at the start that we then forget about. So we've integrated the decision-making panel. They're going to give themselves a better name, by the way, when they start. We don't have a good name for them yet. But the decision-making panel / lived experience group form part of the governance ecosystem. What we've asked the funders to do is to join this, and they've agreed to this, which is great. So they're joining this group called the Oversight and Enabling Board. And we've deliberately called it that because they need oversight, because they're putting significant amounts of money into this. So the oversight part is really important. But what we want these funders and the local authority and everyone else who comes on board in terms of resource holders to enable change. And what we talk about is that, you know, the money is important. We need the money to do the thing. But what we really need people to do is to commit to change and commit to enabling change. And as we all know, people who have positions of power, they have a lot of influence, they know a lot of people, they have, you know, a lot of clout in terms of introductions and things like that. So that's what we want that group to do, is to commit to enabling change as much as commit to having oversight over the programme in terms of their own resources. And I'll just say a couple of words about the fundraising, money moving, which is its new name. So we've got another £9 million to move into this. And the plan for that is to, in the next phase, to continue conversations with some philanthropic foundations that are probably more, now we're looking at like the UK ones. So we've got Esme Fairbairn on board, which is great. So we're going to do some big comms in the next couple of weeks, that's going to be talking about why funders have decided to fund this, you know, what's different for them, what they think they're going to get out of it, what might they do next in terms of this way of working. We're going to be working with, through my colleagues in Foundation Scotland, with individual philanthropists. So that's families, individual philanthropists, who at the moment work with Foundation Scotland to develop funds themselves often. So conversations with philanthropists about contributing to a pooled fund and what that might look like and what the pros and cons might be. So philanthropists is one section, and then we're also going to be looking at corporates in the private sector as well. So that's going to make up hopefully this next just over 9 million. And once we get to that £15 million mark, which hopefully happens during 2025, we then launch the 10-year fund. I'm going to stop there because I was only going to talk for 25 minutes, but that's been 30. And yeah, as Emma was saying, I think Derek's going to chair us beautifully now, but I'm really happy to take questions, but also just super keen to learn about anything that you're working on, any kind of synergies with what we're doing in Edinburgh and what you're thinking about in your own places.
Thank you very much, Leah, and hello everyone. I'm Derek Rankin. I'm the policy manager here at SURF, and yeah, that was a really useful and thought-provoking presentation, Leah. I'm sure we'll have lots to discuss on the back of it, as you said there. So here at SURF, we've actually started some initial engagements towards a manifesto for community regeneration. We'll be promoting that in the run-up to the 2026 Scottish Parliament elections, and what we had about 30 member discussions so far. I think comfortably 75–80% of the policy asks coming from the SURF network are about funding in one way or another, and the main challenge around resources, which you're kind of responding to quite directly. Leah, I think, used the word frustration, which is a bit of an understatement for many SURF members in the conversations we've had. But it's about short-termism and precariousness, which makes it really difficult for any regeneration project, any community-led organisation to plan, sustain itself, to ultimately deliver the kind of outcomes that local people want in their communities across the country. So it's interesting to hear about how you've started with what you described as a really simple idea, that we need long-term unrestricted funding to deliver positive change and tackle the kind of deep-rooted socio-economic issues in our places that need intervention. Now, you've addressed that much less simple problem of making that a reality by building this complex coalition and quite a comprehensive sounding action plan. So it's great to hear more about that. So before I open up for wider discussion, does anyone have any immediate questions on the content of Leah's presentation? Are there any specifics around the Regenerative Futures Fund model that you want a little bit more clarity on? You can raise your hand or use the chat function here if you'd like to come in. Not seeing anyone, so that's a healthy silence. That means everyone's really clear on how the Regenerative Futures Fund model operates. So that's really helpful. So I'll open up for kind of more general questions and comments. And you said earlier you're really interested to learn about whether anyone else in different parts of Scotland is thinking about this, is actually doing this, is aware of a kind of similar approach of bringing funders and partners together to think more long term about a place or whether it's a small neighbourhood or a wider region. So obviously SURF would be really interested to hear more about that as well. And with any kind of linked views and experience around how you're engaging or finding the funding landscape, or maybe I should say money moving landscape, Leah, at present, and what could be done differently, really pleased to hear about that. So I'm just waiting for some hands to go up. Starting to get a bit of a slow start, and then everyone wants to come in later on. So I'll maybe just start us off, Leah. So just to come in on something you mentioned towards the end there, I'm conscious that many places with regeneration challenges, actually multiple community groups supporting people in lots of different ways, and I think even the most generous and unrestricted funding programme will only be able to work with some of them. I think you mentioned you're going to actually work with 15 or 25 organisations in Edinburgh over the course of the programme. How do you kind of see that playing out in terms of the kind of conflicts of interest and the decision making that the community panel will be making, given that some of them are likely involved in some of the groups and the projects that will be delivered? Is that something you've been giving much thought to?
Yes, a lot. Yeah, and I think, I suppose the decision-making processes have to be transparent and robust and clear, and we'll advertise who's on the panel, and the panel get training, and we do conflict of interest training and all of that. I think the reality is, you're right, Derek, this is only going to fund a small group of organisations in Edinburgh, but it's showing what's possible. Is, I think, the way that we're thinking about this in Edinburgh is like, this is it's like a glimmer of possibility in terms of, hopefully we can do this, and we can show that it is possible to create something that is much more long term. We still need the we still need, I don't know if any of you know the Three Horizons model. It's quite a sort of helpful model in terms of thinking about the third horizon is kind of our, you know, moving towards sort of transformation. And in the Three Horizons model, you have this first horizon that's like, what do we, because we always need to be doing less of some things, don't we, in order to do more of other things. And the reason for doing something like this in such an in-depth way in a place and working with so many partners in the place, including working really closely with the local authority, is that, you know, we couldn't, it's not sensible to have a wholesale move to everything becomes 10 years and means that you fund way less organizations because you're putting everything into, you know, large pooled funds. You know, we still need a lot of what we see at the moment. And what we see at the moment supports organizations in different ways, supports individual people in different ways. So we just, we don't have enough of a mix of the short term, the now, the, you know, the dealing with the things that are right in front of us, and then this shift to longer term transformation. So, but yeah, the way that we see it is, and the way, and there will always be, I mean, I've been running organizations and fundraising for a long time, so I know exactly how it feels when you don't get funding that you're really hopeful that you're going to get. But you know, this isn't going to fund, and we've been really clear from the very start, it's not going to fund, it's only going to fund a small cohort, but hopefully it's the start of a shift towards people working differently in places, and whether that's local authorities funding differently or other funders saying, you know, we'd like to try something like this out, and we try it in a different place, or we try it under a different theme or something like that.
Yeah, I suppose the hope would be that, as you say, everyone's desperately competing for year-to-year funding, and the competition between community groups in the same place can be quite fierce. But if some of them get 3-year funding, they can kind of relax, and that takes the pressure off those kind of shorter-term models, which will, as you say, still be around and part of the mix. So yeah, I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat there. So yeah, Leah, I'll come to Craig first. Don't know if you want to come in and ask these verbally, Craig, but I don't see your hand going up, so I'll just mention that you said it's mentioned the fund was for Edinburgh overall. Is it being targeted towards areas of deprivation, or how do you envisage that working?
Not necessarily areas of deprivation, no. Because we know that quite a lot of small organisations supporting particular groups, they work across the city. So yeah, it's not necessarily areas of deprivation.
So it's a citywide approach there. And Robert Scott saying the work you're doing is amazing. Have you been able to break through and get some of the business community, such as Baillie Gifford, to contribute financially towards the work and help towards the 15 million target? Is that the private sector? You mentioned philanthropy.
Yeah, Baillie Gifford's an interesting one, eh? Just because of the I don't know if you're all aware of the challenges of the book festival and the book festival pulling out Baillie Gifford funding for ethical reasons. Yeah, so that is the plan. What we are going to do, I think, with corporate partners is to wait until we've got the capacity building phase up and running, because what we really want to do, I don't know, some of you might have experienced this before with corporates where you I certainly have in past roles where you get an offer from a corporate partner, and sometimes they offer you something that they think is really helpful, and they probably are being really intentionally trying to be kind and helpful, but it can sometimes be very mismatched in terms of what you actually need as a community organisation. So what we are going to try and do is develop relationships with corporate partners in the city once we have the capacity building phase up and running, and work with the organisations to say, like, what would you actually want and need from a corporate partner? Because quite often what corporate partners like to do is to do some financial contribution, then something that their staff can benefit from or contribute to. So something that's like more than money thing again. And what we really want to do is to be able to go to corporate partners and say, this is what communities are actually asking for. and needing. So that's one thing in terms of corporates. We also, just given the kind of fallout of the Baillie Gifford stuff last year as well, just need to build a little group that's looking at ethics and alignment with the fund, in terms of corporate partners as well, so that we're not just like going in all guns blazing. You know, there's the big shots that are headquartered in Edinburgh. We work with them. Actually, we're more considered and careful about who we work with to make sure that it's aligned with the ethos and the vision, the values of the fund and the programme as a whole. So yeah, it's slightly trickier territory, the corporate world, but it is the intention to, and it's not just, again, it's not just the money, it's that we are talking about system change here. And so it's not just about corporate partners and private sector partners putting money in, it's also their commitment to change as well. Like I said about the governance ecosystem, you know, everybody who is part of this, we want them to commit to and enable change, and those corporate partners would have to have and play that role as well.
Yeah, there's certainly some good examples in the Surf network of kind of pro bono services from the corporate sector, especially law firms giving free advice to community groups to help them work. So it's not just about the money. But just as Robert mentions, the £15 million target, Leah, just a practical question for me: is that kind of money in the bank that you guys will hold and you'll give out over the 15 years, or some of that promised in 3 years' time? So I'm just thinking of the kind of practical challenges for funders. I know some of them would love to give away 10 years grants, but they don't know in year 3, will public sector revenues fall? Will less people be playing the lottery? All business plans, you know, won't generate the income they're looking for. I know some funders might not be able to kind of commit resources further down the line, even though they'd like to. They just kind of don't know the money will be there. So are you seeking the money up front, as it were, or is it going to be a kind of rolling annual basis that will depend on perhaps some risk element there?
We're trying to get it all agreed so that we can actually make that commitment to the organisations, and it's not a sort of, yeah, we want to do this for 10 years, but it might end in 2 years or 3 years, whatever. So the commitments that we've got from National Lottery Community Fund put in 2 million, they've committed to 10 years. So but they spread it over 10 years. So it's a £200,000 a year for 10 years. Robertson Trust have committed £1 million. Esme Fairbairn have committed £500,000 for 5 years, and then they'd hope to come in for the second 5. And then the council, if anyone likes watching council committees, I can share the link to the council committee where they made a decision to commit to resourcing Regenerative Futures Fund and being part of the system change, being part of the governance ecosystem for 10 years, which was really significant. I spent a lot of 2024 in council committees, briefing elected members and you know, preparing papers with council colleagues back and forth. So to get to the point where the council said that they voted at their full council meeting in September to commit to working on this for 10 years, what we actually got was 1 year of £100,000, like the first year effectively. But the budgets are being done at the moment, and the plan is that this gets built in long term. That's the riskier one, isn't it? Because, you know, local elections, people, you know, in Edinburgh, we've got a new council leader who's just started in December, I think, or January, Jane Marr. So, you know, things change. You build relationships with particular politicians and then they leave and all of that. So the short-termism of politics is a huge factor in this. But the other funders wanted the council to be contributing financially, which is, I think, the right thing. So the other funders sort of pushed the council on this to say, you know, we've got, you know, £4 million here that we're committing to Edinburgh. We're prepared to commit to Edinburgh over 10 years. We want you to be committing financially to this as well. So so yeah, we just need to keep work. But we've got the council, we've got the leader of the council is on our oversight enabling board. So we've got, you know, really strong links with the elected members and with the staff in the council. But that's the more wobbly one. I probably shouldn't say wobbly, but that's the less definite one. The other ones are contract for 10 years. If everything went terribly wrong and, you know, we weren't doing what we said we were going to do, that those funders could, you know, exit, but it's unlikely, you know, as long as we keep doing what we're meant to be doing, and bringing the other money in, then there's no reason why the other funders would pull out. The contracts are all for 10 years, which is quite unusual. Esme couldn't do the 10 years, they wanted to do 5, but yeah, for Robertson Trust, it's the first time they've done anything like this. Lottery have done stuff like this before with Life Changes Trust and other things, but yeah, for some of these funders, it's quite a new way of working. So that would be the intention with everybody, is to, even if we don't have the cash in the bank, that we have the commitment there for 10 years.
Yeah, that definitely is unusual. That's a kind of age-old problem. Is I think a lot of people working the surf network say regeneration is long term. It takes 10 to 15 years minimum to make a serious difference in a place. But we have these short electoral cycles, budgets change year to year. How do we kind of make all of that work? So it's really interesting to hear more about that. So yeah, Paul, are you interested in hearing watching committee evidence sessions? Is that why you're up, or just something else?
That didn't jump to mind, Derek. When I was, I was just, Leah, I think it's really interesting what you're doing, and again, we've been talking about long-term funding for a very long time, and this is really welcome. This is just a couple of wee thoughts, and having been involved in one organisation that did small pots of money to community groups, you'll obviously be just one of a cocktail of funders for some of these community groups that are taking things forward. Have you thought about that? You know, that you know, let's say you contribute £100,000 to a community project per year. They're maybe bringing in £200,000 from other funders, and there's the competing demands on their time and whatnot. Have you got any thoughts about how? I mean, I'm thinking, is it core funding? Is it for specific projects? How will the funding work within the contents of a particular Edinburgh project?
Yeah, it's a good question, because when we started working on this, one of the things that we had built in at the start was low bureaucracy. And again, from the experience of, you know, running an organisation where you're not, where we had, I don't even know, like hundreds of funders, you know, if you count all the tiny little ones, and it's so hard. Yeah, it's so difficult to keep on top of that, and then you kind of, you know, you kind of groan when you get a funder that's like, and then we want you to join the, you know, whatever, join this platform and come and meet other people that are being funded, which can sometimes be a bit like, oh goodness, just to get the funding, we have to sort of do all these extra things, right? Okay, fine, we'll do it, and, you know, in a grudging way. But it's interesting having then designed this with people for 2 years, and actually what's come out is that because this is an Edinburgh programme, because it's about collaboration, there is an expectation that those in the cohort will actually have to play a part in that ecosystem, and that's just the expectation. So if that's something that doesn't work for an organisation, then this wouldn't be the right thing for them. And it feels a bit different to like, I can think of a programme that we got funding for at Whale that was like a digital skills thing, and we had to join this like national network, and it just felt like very unnecessary. Whereas with this, because it's about local system change, it feels actually almost more necessary that organisations do like embrace the collaborative aspect of this. So maybe that answers part of your question. The other part was,
are you expecting it to be core funding for staff to take forward particular?
Oh yeah, so it can be for whatever they want to use it for, as long as they're working towards these big aims, and they're looking at the intersections between the themes or the problems. So poverty, intersection between poverty and racism, poverty and climate crisis, or all three, which, you know, pretty much every charity in Edinburgh would be focused around poverty anyway, you would imagine, in some respects. So So that funnels it a little bit. It's not going to be for every organisation, every community group. It's not going to be the right thing for them. But the idea is that they can use it in whatever way they need to use it for. Because think about it, it's 10 years. Like what you're using it for at the start is not going to be what you're using it for at the end. Like at the start, it might be like I don't know, our board is like chaotic. We need to sort that out. That's like our first thing. Like, you know, so it's almost flipping the kind of like the capacity building phase is almost flipping the due diligence thing. I don't know if anyone who's worked in funding organisation, you get due diligence, which is like, do you tick all the boxes? Have you got X, Y, and Z? If you don't, see you later. Whereas this is like, okay, it's okay if you don't have all that stuff. The whole point of capacity building phase is that you work up what you need to work up. And then it's a good question about, I mean, I don't think we talk about unrestricted funding, it probably wouldn't go as, you know, on accounts. It probably wouldn't be classed as unrestricted funding on accounts. I don't know, we haven't quite bottomed that out yet, but what we're saying is unrestricted in terms of the project, so they can use it for staff, or they can use it for a specific project, or they could use it for, I don't know, whatever it might be.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I've got some questions in the chat from Anna Whelan, Sean Bodden, and Chris Woodness. So if you'd like to come in and ask verbally, just put your hand in. But I'll start with Anna, who asked, one of the challenges for receiving funding is always about reporting. What kind of reporting model are you planning? And Anna clarifies that that's for the reporting from the community groups to yourselves, and not from yourselves to the funders.
I had this on my notes to talk about, but I think I blathered too much at the start. So we're working up a framework at the moment for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We're going to approach the reporting in really relational and creative ways. So we're going to try as much as possible to not make organisations write one dry report that, you know, those reports that you write and you think, is anyone actually going to read this? And again, because we're working with quite a small cohort, we're going to bring people together a lot. We're going to have lots of conversations, lots of relational. We use lots of creative methods to draw like data and evidence out of what's happening within the groups. There will be probably an element of pulling together, you know, more kind of qualitative data, but we're definitely going for the more qualitative, but we're going to be going for the more kind of, you know, relational storytelling, creative approaches. It's a tricky one as well, because we're sandwiched in between, we will be sandwiched in between community organisations and funders that expect a report. So we're sort of managing that. There's a flow there between what the funders expect and what the organisations really want to report. So it's an exciting opportunity to try and work out a reporting model that creates a flow of interesting information from the community organisations to the funders, as part of that, again, as part of that governance ecosystem. So, as much as possible, trying to not do the kind of standard thing, which probably lots of you experience at the moment in terms of reporting.
I think that would sound very welcome. I'll move on to Sean, who's in a very noisy room at the moment. Sean would love to hear more about the challenges you mentioned in trying to get funders to finally implement the big decisions to contribute funding to the pool. Are there specific concerns that are stopping them, like bureaucracy or competing deadlines? And what strategies have you been developing for taking those partnerships to the next steps?
I mean, have you got another hour?
So it'll vary funder to funder, and they'll have their own internal processes that they'll be trying to navigate.
I mean, I think
that commitment is there.
I think the main two things. It's a really good question, Sean. I think two things are. I think one of the big barriers is the decision-making shift. Then that's the thing that really, when you get to the end of the process, it's like, oh, right. So we're not going to be making. It's not going to be a funder decision who's going to get funded. It's like, that's what's going to happen. It's not. It's going to be decisions are going to not be made by the funder. That's a complete shift in decision-making power, and that feels, I think, can feel quite different and nerve-wracking for some people in funding organisations. I think the main strategy that's been amazing, one of the things I've absolutely loved doing is going to do presentations funders, to, you know, sort of senior teams and funders, talking to trustees, talking to elected members and things like that, but actually doing it with my colleagues at End Poverty Edinburgh, and in some of the community organisations. So actually going and doing, like, we did a lottery presentation we asked for £5 million. We didn't get 5, we got 2. But that was a group of us. It was me, somebody from End Poverty Edinburgh, somebody from a community organisation, somebody from a funding organisation. So to be able to go and do these presentations with people who come from totally different backgrounds, bring different perspectives, like the best presentations that I've ever been part of. So that would be kind of the main strategy. Also, just as I mentioned at the start, like, if any of you are thinking about doing this, just like think about who your sounding boards are, who your support networks are, because for me, that facilitator group has been just amazing. You know, as we've been kind of moving through the different stages, you go a bit of back and forth as well. So you kind of get to a point, you write a proposal, and there's a bit of like, okay, we need a few more clarifications, and then you go back in. So there's a lot of like backwards and forwards, and just having like really good support networks and people that I can trust and talk confidentially to about things that are kind of, you know, that pop up that are kind of a bit more tricky. But
That's
yeah.
a takeaway from our Surf Awards, Leah. It's the judges that go to visit projects where they meet with service users and volunteers, as well as staff and project managers. They get a really full understanding of what the project's doing and how it's achieving its aim. So yeah, I think that's a good approach, for sure. And yeah, next question from Chris Woodness. Says, forgive me if you've already covered this, but he wonders if the Regenerative Futures Fund might lend itself to an academic study by Edinburgh University's, the Institute of Education, Community and Society. You did mention you've got a partnership with Edinburgh University around your collective imagination strategy. You wanting to say a bit more about that and any other academic partnerships?
I'm actually right now in the colleague that asked the question. I'm in Edinburgh Futures Institute, so this is where we're now based. So yeah, so working with colleagues in Edinburgh Futures Institute, I'm up for that. Just yeah, I can make sure maybe Emma and Derek, you could share my email address with the group, but yeah, just drop me an email. We haven't really explored academic partnerships yet, but it's something that's kind of on our plan to think about as things move forward. So yeah,
we're very happy to do that, and that kind of triggers a thought from me. We were part of an academic initiative called Smart Urban Intermediaries. It was led by Oliver Escobar, that I think many on the call will
I know Oliver.
the University of Edinburgh. He's an expert on community participation and local governance. And yeah, this was a project looking at how people working and volunteering in the more deprived parts of 4 European cities, how they actually bring together people and organisations and resources to make positive change happen. And one of the big findings was about burnout in the people in these roles, how it's so difficult to constantly negotiate with funders, engage with communities, deliver tangible projects, everything that goes along with this kind of stuff that we all know about. And a lot of it, you touched on, Leah, kind of invisible work. A lot of it is just not seen by the community or the funders. Really hard work that goes into making things happen. So did you kind of see, have you talked about burnout as part of the Regenerative Futures Fund approach?
Yeah, we have.
Kind of reducing burnout, the fact if people are
Yeah.
spending less time doing annual funding applications, and you kind of mentioned a kind of lighter reporting mechanisms as well. Is that something that's kind of part of the rationale, as it were?
Yeah. We've got a kind of like a strand that's about like thinking about like care and compassion and healing. And yeah, burnout is, I mean, yeah, we had a session with community organisations where we spoke a lot about burnout, because it's, I mean, I've been there as well, and it's just, yeah, it's so tough. It's
an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a really tough skill set, and yeah, especially people that are, quite a few of the people in the study were based in the communities they work, as well as doing all this hard work. They kind of walk down the high street and they're stopped for updates from people. So it's a big challenge for sure, and I think one that's quite underplayed in regeneration more generally. So yeah, so I'm pleased there's kind of an appetite for more kind of academic links. Are there any other questions for Leah? Not seeing any hands going up. Thanks from Jonathan Clarkson, which I think will be repeated by lots of people in the Surf network. Yeah, if there's nothing else, I'll hand back to you, Emma, but thank you once again for the presentation, Leah. We'll follow up as usual by sharing some further information, Leah. So if you want to send us the kind of governance mapping slide or any other information you'd like us to share through our website and email, we'll be very happy to do that. But thank you again. Over to you, Emma. Oh, you're on mute.
Being prepared there. I'm trying to do all the buttons. Usually I just do the buttons and Ewan does the chat. So thanks to both Leah and Derek for the presentation and for the really informative discussion. Hopefully that's gave you all some food for thought about doing things differently. The rallying call there from Leah to make some change. So just before I close with some closing remarks, I am going to hand to Lauren McNiven, who is a student at Heriot-Watt University, and she's looking for you all to get involved in some research that she's doing into living well locally in later life. So I'll hand to Lauren just to tell you a wee bit more about that.
Thanks, Emma. I think there are a few people here that I know or have already been in touch with, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lauren McNiven. I'm a second year PhD student at Heriot-Watt, and my research is focused on active ageing in the context of 20-minute neighbourhoods. So the focus is basically to explore the potential for 20-minute neighbourhoods to support older adults to live well, if you like, in later life in areas of deprivation across Edinburgh. So there's 3 case study areas. One's Craigmillar, one's Granton, excluding the harbour, and the other one's Wester Hailes. So those were all, I mean, I'm sure you're aware anyway, but they were all identified in the City of Edinburgh Council strategy as potential 20-minute neighbourhood development areas. So that's where that kind of part has come from. But the basic focus will obviously be on older adults' experiences of what it's like to stay active in their area, what staying active means to them, what is already on offer in their area and what maybe could be better. But on top of that, I'm interested in the perspectives of practitioners, professionals, people like yourselves, who work in a relevant area. So whether that be ageing or 20-minute neighbourhoods or urban planning, policy, community organisations, anything really that's in any way relevant, just to find out your perspectives on the 20-minute neighbourhood policy in general, and then the extent to which older adults are considered within this, to kind of work out whether there is enough of an account of older adults and whether it can help to support them. So part of that is, it's not just physical activity, which is obviously plays a big part, but a lot of it as well is that kind of sense of place, sense of community, social activity as well, that feeds into that active ageing. So even though active tends to mean physical activity, it's more just anything that contributes to older adults' well-being, anything that they find important to them, and whether that's supported. So yeah, basically I'm just putting a call out there. Participation would involve, in the first case, an interview, a one-to-one interview with me, either on Teams, in person. I'm flexible in terms of what suits people. So yeah, that would probably last about an hour, and that would just be to explore perceptions and things like that. And then the second phase is a more optional community mapping session, which would take place in one of the 3 case study areas with older residents from that area. And the idea there is to kind of help the older adults to design their ideal, if you like, 20-minute neighbourhood. So what maybe works for them that's already in the strategy and what they think needs to be added and what would be important for them to be in there. And having it in these areas where regeneration's already kind of underway, but some of it's quite early stages. So hopefully having their input could maybe make little tweaks or changes to make it more fruitful for them once it's in place, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's my little spiel. I'm happy to share my email in the chat for anyone who's maybe interested or wants to know more. I think Emma's going to send out a little kind of poster as well that's got the details, but yeah, if anyone's interested or wants more information, just give me a shout and I'm happy to send that over.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, so following on from this, I will share Leah's slide because I do have that, and I will share Lauren's contact details and the poster that she sent through. So just to end the session, I would just like to thank Leah and Lauren for their input and Derek for chairing the discussion. The recording and everything will be sent later this afternoon. The next session is scheduled for Thursday the 27th of March and will include a presentation from Hammond Associates Scotland on how they can assist charities to find affordable, flexible workspaces. And hopefully we can possibly have Irene back for that session as well. Information on it will be circulated in February. And the dates are now been added for the rest of this year up until March 2026. So if you want to get them in your diary, they are now on the website, but I'll send a link to that in the follow-up information. So thank you again for attending today, and apologies that it is a slightly shorter session, but it does give you a wee free bit of time now that you've got back, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.